Hello, this is Henry Fogel, and again, I'm here with Ralph Creviso. And in this video, Ralph and I are going to talk about really a subject that's a continuation of what we spoke about in the video from last week. It's programming and presentation. And I think that's a really important distinction to make. Many people tend to think about programming in terms of what are you going to perform, what play, what opera, what symphony. But I think, and I think Ralph agrees, that equally important is how is it going to be presented? So for example, if an orchestra is playing a new modern piece that's going to be a little difficult for the audience to understand, does it help if the conductor speaks to the audience for 3 or 4 minutes before it and gives them some guideposts to listen to? And in the case of opera, Ralph, you know this, I know you're a big opera lover, how an opera is presented and staged has an infinite variety of possibilities.
Well, what you see happening is the old tradition of just standing and performing.
Yeah. Has
evolved into something that's much more interactive and flows better on the stage, whether it be an opera, even a play. Shakespearean plays can be produced in almost a stand and speak, just like opera can be stand and bark, as they say. But what's happening is there's more of an interaction on the stage that is evocative of what it is that's happening. And then the set is created to complement that and add more depth and understanding to either the story or the emotion that's trying to be created at that particular time.
Some years ago, I saw a performance of Verdi's opera Macbeth at the Washington National Opera. The only set, the only item that was on stage ever was the witch's cauldron. There was no other set. Everything else was done by projections. And that, of course, saved money on a stagehand cost that more than compensated for the extra money that was spent on the technology. But it was also fascinating, from my point of view, to see how you could recreate a palace banquet and everything else, all using just projections. I think the points we want to make in this video and want you to think about in this week is A, the importance of not only what you're presenting, but how it's presented. And B, again, the importance of having the artistic side of your organization on the decision-making process of presentation and as well as programming. So for example, in the dance world, there's a huge issue in terms of budget, in terms of cost. Will you do a dance to a recording or to a live orchestra? That's depending on the size of the company, that's a $25,000 to more than $100,000 question for a production of, say, the Nutcracker. I think also in orchestras, do you add any visual element at all? And certainly for theater and opera, there are all of these issues that are up for discussion that you want to not only have discussed from a financial point of view. And it's very tricky, Ralph. I think it's very complicated because the artistic director is always going to want to stretch the organization, and the management is going to want to keep a control on costs. And I think that tension actually is often good and healthy as long as it is handled constructively. And to me, part of what we are talking about in this course is not how do you eliminate tension, how do you creatively and constructively handle it?
And Henry, I'll pose a question to you. Who's responsible for programming? Should it be the artistic director? After all, that person's in charge of the product. Should it be the executive director? Because after all, they're in charge of the budget. Should it be the board artistic committee? Because after all, they're defining from a governance point of view how the organization functions. Should it be marketing? They have to sell it. Should it be development? They have to raise money for it. Should it be the musicians, if there are musicians, or the actors? Should it be the audience? What do you think?
I think the answer is yes.
Exactly.
It needs to be, to some degree, all of those. The audience, first of all, you get their feedback from ticket sales. They vote with their feet. The musicians, if it's an orchestra, should have a role in programming. The board's artistic committee should have an advisory role. The marketing director, the development director, all of these people have a place in the discussion because they have a responsibility. You have said, Ralph, in previous years that you and I have taught this course, you have made a connection that we haven't yet made, and we're going to make right now, between responsibility and authority.
One of my favorite subjects, Henry.
Well, you can't be given responsibility with no authority. It may not mean total authority, but if you have no voice, if you're the marketing director and you have no voice in helping to shape the programming, then it's not fair for you to be given the total responsibility of ticket sales.
Well, let me expand on that. So let's say the artistic director wants to produce a new play that has not been received very well, doesn't have a good reputation, but it's a real stretch for the organization. If the marketing director didn't have any say in that, and they suddenly are held responsible for a targeted revenue number, as you say, they're responsible for producing that number, but they've had no authority in helping to shape the decision. So it's unfair to hold them accountable for that responsibility, having excluded them from the decision-making process.
Yeah, and if they had been included, it may not mean that they would have said, that they would have prevailed, but they would have been listened to. And if nothing else, perhaps the executive director might have lowered ticket sale projections for that production, having heard the marketing director. So
perhaps they may have sought a smaller venue if it was available, because they knew it wouldn't sell well. These are the kinds of alternatives that would only come up if there was a community of interests represented in the discussion.
In all of the performing art forms, the issue of programming and presentation is critical. In the orchestra world, the expenses can vary, even if you're a full-size orchestra, like the Chicago Symphony, which I managed. If the music director wants to program Richard Strauss's Alpine symphonies, the Chicago Symphony has to hire 16 extra musicians. If the orchestra wants to take that on tour, it not only has to hire 16 extra musicians, it has to pay travel and hotel and meal expenses for that. So if the music director was to say, well, this is an artistic issue and I have artistic control, the executive director has to say, no, it's also a financial issue and I have financial control. And then you debate it and discuss it.
And as you've said, Henry, there's never a purely artistic decision, right?
Right. I think the key in this area, the key to think about, there's huge change in generations. You know, I'm 77 years old. I have children and grandchildren in their 40s and 20s now. Each of those generations has a different expectation of what it wants from a performing arts experience. And when we think about what we're presenting, I think we have to think about what audience are we hoping to attract and how might we present it in a way that will attract that audience. Um, and that means perhaps looking at the history of some of our art forms. The symphony orchestra has really changed less than any other art form. Symphony concert today often looks like a concert looked exactly to Brahms. Maybe we should have more speaking or more visual components of it. If you're preparing an opera by Verdi, do you set it in the time Verdi wrote it, or do you update it? Those are all key decisions. And I think both the executive and artistic side of the organization have to weigh in on that.
And Henry, there was a recent production of King Lear on Broadway, and it was something like what you just said. There were elements of it that were very traditional in a Shakespearean production that went back to the Globe Theater. And there were aspects of it that were very modern. And it was an interesting mix. And as a result of that, it was King Lear. It was a staple. Everybody expected to sell. It was a controversial production. And the controversy drew in audience, and the traditional aspects of it drew in audience. And so that decision on that particular program had considered a lot of different aspects that successfully attracted a new kind of audience. It was traditional and non-traditional. And it was generated by the controversy and the discussions that were created around this new production.
And I think we're going to wrap up this video by simply saying, Ralph, I have a feeling, even though I haven't rehearsed this with you, I have a feeling you will agree with me. If you are in the position of being the CEO, the chief executive officer of a performing arts organization, one of the most important parts of your job is to create a climate that allows for open exchange of ideas with comfort, not discomfort.
Henry, you and I agree 99.9% of the time. I think that's absolutely critical. Open discussion, transparency, honesty, and eliminating fear of bringing up perhaps controversial subjects is essential to an organization that runs well and makes good decisions.
Good. On that note, we'll close. Thank you,
Henry.